This week we kicked off with a regional coronavirus roundup.
It's not good news coming from India, Dotun. And, overall in these sort of relatively underdeveloped countries, coronavirus has 10 times the impact it does where you are, for instance, Dotun, in the UK or in the West. And this is for a number of reasons. Generally, except for one country, you can say there's a poor public health system, poor infrastructure, big populations. The system is under-resourced. The figures are often mostly underreported. And there's not only low testing, the testing seems to be going down in some countries. And in the big cities, of course, there was panic buying, there was hoarding, and it's the rural workers, the daily wage earners, the working classes who were impacted most. And of course, there's a general atmosphere of bribery and corruption. So for safety, whatever figures I will tell you today, I will quote the WHO and Johns Hopkins University. Now, the situation in India is quite worrisome because it's the fastest growing outbreak in the world and the highest now, third highest now. And the cases are doubling every 21 days. As you say, this is a big country, 1.3 billion people. And so far, 2.5 million people have been reported as, and the number of deaths is around 50,000 and rising. And here in India, there's a shortage of doctors. And the situation of the understaffing is so bad that they've even had to draft in unqualified people, junior physios and people like that, who are expected to administer life-saving ventilation after 1-hour crash courses. And this paucity in the whole system is very pronounced in Kashmir. You and I were talking over a year ago about how India had imposed this set of curfews and lockdown as it made big changes and kind of annexed Kashmir to itself and made it into another state. And since March with lockdown, there's been a whole cycle of these lockdowns. And this is really felt in the rural areas and in places like Srinagar, the capital. There generally isn't enough oxygen beds, medicine, even drinking water. And in a place like Central Jail, where I have been as a visitor, please don't ask me how, but it was on behalf of this organisation, 1 in 5 inmates is now down with coronavirus. And this is very serious and quite symptomatic. So particularly, we need to keep an eye on Kashmir, which is being underreported.
What about Bangladesh? Bad news there as well?
Sorry to tell you, yes. Country of over 170 million and so far reported over 27,000 cases and 4,000 deaths. Now, the World Bank is so worried about Bangladesh that it said way back in April that if nothing is done for the poor and the marginalized, 50 million Bangladeshis could be driven into poverty. Now, I say that, but there are parts of Bangladesh which have done very well over the years, and that's because of the Bangladeshis who go abroad. They fan out across the globe. As you know, there are many of them in the UK and across Northern Europe and the Middle East and South Korea and China, as well as Italy. Now, these Bangladeshis all had to go back home as soon as coronavirus hit. And previously, they sent many American dollars back into the country to the tune of over 18 million. That makes a big difference to the economy. And because of corona's lockdown, that money isn't now coming into Bangladesh. These foreign Bangladeshis are desperate to go back to where they've settled. And to do that, the countries want them to have test certificates. So what's happened in this kind of country? There's been a whole racket in fake test certificates being issued, inflated prices, and because they're not reliable, places like Italy, South Korea and China have said no coming back here unless you have a real certificate, and we don't trust you anyway. So these countries and all the 26 countries of the Schengen area have also banned Bangladeshis from coming back. So this is very serious. The government came in for so much criticism, Dotun, that They sort of, in a token fashion, half-heartedly arrested 3 people who'd been dealing in fake certificates, but it's not enough.
And in Pakistan, I imagine if it's that bad in India and it's that bad in Bangladesh, that Pakistan is no different.
Pakistan is also a bad news story, but there is a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel that I'll come to there in Pakistan. Now, this is a smaller country than India, reportedly around 29,000 cases and 6,000 deaths. And in Pakistan, there are things like families switching the cause of death of the loved ones who have passed. So they get the bodies back, but they're not faced with the embarrassment of declaring that, the patient had coronavirus. And in rural areas, this has been going on for some time, there are always conspiracy theories. And so vaccines and health officials are not trusted at all. And if they come to a village to test, they're sent packing. Now, in Pakistan, there's one thing that works quite well compared to other South Asian countries, and that is that their NGOs and charity systems are kind of pick up the economic burden where the government fails. And for years, they've been helping the poor and needy by delivering meals and medical services. And just recently, under a philanthropic initiative, a group of charities was brought together, and they're working to distribute 10 million meals distributed right across Pakistan using 500 volunteers in conjunction with the NGOs. Now, there are many, many vulnerable households in Pakistan, Dotun. There's the whole of the transgender community. And one of them was saying on the record recently, we're born into isolation. We can't get jobs. We can't have homes. Many of us are educated, but we're not allowed to work. So you're suffering isolation now. We've had it since we were born. And, there are fishermen who live on islands in the waters of one of the southern cities in Karachi. And they and religious minorities, they're all very, very beleaguered. And it's said that about 80% of the poor can't afford food. And the disabled, the less able, they don't have the same position of respect or the same space as other family members do, the way you give it to them in the West. And so they are very, very in straitened circumstances. And it was heartbreaking for some of the volunteers who really are dedicated people to see that, that there's such a lack of food that these less able people were crawling for miles and miles and sort of trying to get themselves along the street somehow or other. Such is their need for food to come to the distribution points because nobody was helping them.
You mentioned that people are ashamed to write that their loved ones had died of coronavirus, or embarrassed. Embarrassed is the word you use. Embarrassed, why?
Because then they get boycotted by the rest of society. Their friends, if they're in the villages, they will get shunned and probably isolated themselves. And they also have to bury these individuals, so they do need the bodies. So the sense of community and family, Dotun, your tribe in the tribal areas, it's so strong in South Asia across the board. The worst thing is to be in complete isolation, the way, people in Europe can handle or perhaps can't handle, simply because of the numbers of the population. You just can't isolate people. Everybody intermingles. It's normal.
Bhutan is a tiny country. Just tell us, first of all, where is Bhutan and what do we need to know about that country?
Bhutan is a real shining light in the whole of the international coronavirus scene. It's a tiny Himalayan kingdom, landlocked, sandwiched between China and India, with whom it does share an open border. That's with India. The population is only 770,000, And to date, it's only had 138 cases and 0 deaths. It is a monarchy. It's ruled by a king, a sort of young, educated guy called Jigme Kesa Namgyal Wangchuk. And they have this gross national happiness philosophy. Have you ever heard of it?
Gross national happiness philosophy. Surely that's what our prime minister has been talking about for some time, isn't it? You know, we're all in this together, etc. No, I've never heard of it. I've never heard of it.
Well, it really is the secret to uh, the success story that is Bhutan. In many respects, the community is very close knit, and also people really care for each other.
Don't you want to go to Bhutan now? Rani Singh there bringing us the news from the subcontinent.